Hello and welcome. My name is Melanie McComb, and I'm a staff genealogist for American Ancestors. And we're here doing our second Facebook Live. So American Ancestors Live, brought to you now to discuss vital records. So we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of a vital record, because the vital records can be really crucial to helping you find more clues to find more family. So I want to help you look at all the different fields that can lead to more records along the way. So as we're going through the presentation, if you have any questions, please put in the comments. And if you have any technical difficulties as well, we do have staff that will be able to assist you. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to be primarily talking about birth, marriage, and death records today. So with birth records, we start with the obvious. We have, the name of a child that is born, we have their birth date, their place of birth, and hopefully we have parents' names. Now, when we get into some early records, especially in colonial New England, you may not always see both parents' names. You may just see the father's name and not necessarily the mother's name. So that can require more research. When we start getting into more modern records, which we'll show in a moment, we start to see possibilities of parents' occupation, their birthplace, where they're living, even down to a street address, the race of the child, and even the number of previous children. Now, so if we go back to colonial New England, early birth records looked very much like this format. They were recorded by town clerks. So in this case, Willard Grosvenor and his wife Abigail had all their children registered in Suffield, Connecticut. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that the children were all born in Suffield, Connecticut. It means that the children were all recorded at one time. So that's really crucial, because if you look at the handwriting, it's very much the same. So it's likely all the children were recorded together. But you get all this great detail down for each child, down to their full birth date and their name, in some cases almost like a nickname. So you see something like Polly, which maybe more nickname for Mary or another name. So that can be really crucial when you're trying to look at an entire family unit. So what you want to do is you want to try to look for other records like baptism records to back up the earlier records you find in these records to confirm exactly where the children were born, since they're likely going to be baptized at a local parish church if they do practice infant baptism. So as we move on and get into more modern records, so into the 1900s especially, we start to see a different format. So now we're seeing birth registers. So these are a compilation of different births that are arranged by date. So if you see up here at the top, we have April 13th, and then it goes numerically down the page. So if you have an idea of your ancestor's birth date, you can use that while going into the year of the register to try to find that record. So this is actually births registered in the city of Malden, Massachusetts. And in this case here, we have a Rose M. Connolly, and she was born in Malden Hospital, and her parents' names are noted as Michael J. and Minnie S. Walsh. Now, she has a nickname, so that would be a reason why you may not be able to find that. Now, something to keep in mind when you're searching in our vital records collections, which this comes from, the parents' names don't appear to be indexed. So you need to search by the child's name to come up with their birth. So you need to have a good idea of what their name was. And then from here, you get additional details such as the parents were living in Malden, the occupation of the father. So he was a bookkeeper, and he was born in Prince Edward Island, and she was born in Somerville. So, and it looks like they noted Somerville, PEI, which actually is a town there. So it does give a lot of good detail on how you can go to additional records. When we get into even more modern records, so now these are coming from New York City, now you start seeing more of a certificate format. And a lot of times what a lot of town clerks would do is that they would extract the detail from the register style format and make up a certificate. So you're going to see lots of different formats. If you look at your birth certificates today, it very much will look different than if you looked at a birth, say, 100 years ago. So, and in this case, they require us to do a little bit of rotation here. So up at the top, we have Esther Alter is the name of the child here, but all the information is sideways. So to save you a little bit of, eye squint, I turned it up the right side up so you can actually see the information. So we have noted name of the child, that we have noted that her race, she was white, her date of birth, place of birth, her parents' names, which is helpful here, and it even has the mother's maiden name, which is really key, because sometimes in, especially like the register format, the mother's maiden name may not always be captured. So it might just be the same last name as their husband. So it's nice when we can always see that maiden name here. Their birthplace, so they were both born in Austria. You have their ages here. And like I mentioned before about number of previous children, this can be really key when you're looking to see, have you identified all the children of a particular family? So in this case, the mother had already had 5 children and 3 were living. So that means that we likely would find 2 stillbirths or infant deaths or small children that had died if we look on here. And then if we think we haven't caught everybody, we can use that birth order to see if we are missing a child along the way. So a lot of key detail here is noted on the certificate. Now, for marriage records, similarly, we're going to capture a lot of that similar information about, we're going to capture the occupation, hopefully their residence, and of course, where and when they got married. The biggest one I always like to look for on the marriage record is who did the marriage, because the officiant can lead you to additional records here. Now, in this case, this was for my maternal great-grandparents, Anton Galunas and Molly Siegel, and they were actually married at City Hall. Now, even though it's not going to lead us to a religious record that we would see if they were married by a priest, let's say, or a minister, there is something really important in that a lot of the 20th century records you'll find, and sometimes even a little bit earlier, you find marriage licenses. So New York City is kind of unique in that they have a full 3-page application. So the certificate is actually the end page of that document that you can pull. And these actually come from the New York City Municipal Archives. So in order to get a license, Anton and Molly had to fill out an affidavit for license to marry. They had to fill out all their information, which is not captured on the certificate, including where they were living, their place of residence. And if you see closely here, they're actually living on the same street. They're just down the block from each other. We also have noted their occupations. Anton was a jewelry engraver and Molly was a dressmaker. And they were both from 2 different parts of the world. Anton was from Russia at the time. He actually came from Latvia originally, and Molly was born in Romania. And what was really key is that we have their parents' information noted here as well, including mother's maiden name. Sadly, Anton didn't remember his mother's maiden name. I know, shame on him. I keep wanting to ask him. I actually met him when he was turning 100 years old, and if I had known now what I did, I would have asked him, why don't you know your mother's maiden name? But we'll find out eventually. And then they had to attest how many marriages they had. So were they widowed? Were they divorced? And then they also had to note that they confirmed that they had not been infected with any venereal disease or anything. They had to let them know they actually had to have a blood test to get married. Now, they were Ashkenazi Jewish, so that makes sense at the time that they also would be looking at that as well. If they were looking for any other conditions that might come up. But that was actually a requirement in New York City, is that you had to confirm that you don't have anything that would create any issues with getting married. So, and have children later on. And down at the bottom here, you see their signatures, which is really lovely. On the next page is the actual marriage license, and a lot of this information is already captured over, but now we know that it's been signed by the city clerk and that they have been given permission now to marry and could move forward. Now, a point to note about licenses: even if you find a license, make sure you find if there's a corresponding certificate, since it's very possible that there could have been a couple filed for a license and then somebody withdrew out of the wedding, or someone died and then they didn't proceed with it. So it's really important that we're looking for all the pages of the documentation to know when we're looking at marriages. So now we're going to jump into a quick demo of American Ancestors on how we can find a marriage record using the Massachusetts Vital Records collection and also find some church records. Okay, so we're going to move over here. Okay, all right, so you should be seeing American Ancestors now. Make sure my share is going. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, so in American Ancestors, we're going to search in the Vital Records collection. So we're going to go to Search All Databases. And the reason why we're doing all databases is in this case, we're looking for a marriage that might overlap two of our series. So we're actually going to look for Michael Rooney's marriage record. And it's a possibility that it could have fallen over several different years. So we want to see if we can narrow it down. So we're actually going to put in his name. We're going to select the record type of marriage. And if I know the date of marriage, the year of marriage, I can put this in here as well. So in this case, I'm actually going to put in a range. So we know that he came to the US about 1896, 1897, and would have married before 1924, just based on census records and other records we have. If we have the spouse's name, we can also add this here. So I'm actually going to add in her first name. So we know he married Adelia. So we're going to look for Michael Rooney married Adelia between these ranges. So we're going to go ahead and click search. Okay. Now in this case here, we have a possible church record, but we're not quite sure if it's them. So we're actually going to back up a little bit here, and we're actually going to take off Delia. And we're going to search on just Michael O. So you can actually refine your search. So I'm going to refine my search a little bit and add his middle initial in. Okay. So now I got a possible one, 1897. I'm going to click on View Image to see the actual record. And now this is a marriage register format, so similar to we saw with the birth registers, there are marriage registers, there are death registers. And here we find a Michael O. Rooney, so middle initials can be really important to know we have the right person, married Adelia McCurk. So he was a horseshoer, she was a domestic, and they were born in Prince Edward Island. And these are their parents' names. So his was Michael and Mary, and hers was Michael and Ellen. Now, we have the name of the clergy here, the officiant. Now, in other records, it's more obvious what the religion is. So in this case, if you go up here, there's a Baptist, there's a Catholic priest, there's all different religions, but they didn't tell us who Dennis was. So sometimes we have to get really creative. And one way you can do it is just Google it. Google the name of the officiant to see if you can figure out what religion they fall under. So now if I go to Google and I type in Dennis F. Lee, and I'm also going to make sure that I even add Boston, just to narrow it down, because we know they're getting married in Boston. And we'll see if we get a hit. So we do get a hit. It's a little bit older, but one collection is the Hoffman's Catholic Directory. A lot of the different religions would put out their own published directories, which list the names of their clergy and where they were stationed at the time. So, whoops, go back up. Okay, so if we scroll down here a little bit, we see Archdiocese of Boston. We got a hit on a name. There is a Dennis F. Lee attached to a St. Mary's Church at the time in Boston. So it might be a little bit older, and you also can look for more directories that are closer to the year of the marriage. But we at least have an idea of there is a Dennis F. Lee that is Catholic. And I know about this family is they actually are Roman Catholic, so that makes perfect sense. So if we go back to our search, we're going to go back up to American Ancestors. And then we're going to go ahead and click Search All Databases. But now we're going to search in the Archdiocese of Boston. So we are actually digitizing the parish registers from the Archdiocese of Boston through 1920. So we're going to see if we can find him here. So if we type in Michael O. Rooney, and we're going to select that marriage record type again. And now we know there's an 1897 marriage. We're going to now select in the database. We're going to go down to Massachusetts and we're going to select that Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston Records Collection. So this allows you to do a targeted database search on one database you're interested in. So you're going to go ahead and click search. And there was that record that came up that we thought we might be interested in. So let's go ahead and click view image here. So different church, but at the time I learned that Dennis F. Lee actually was attached to St. James the Greater. So we know this looks very possible. So we're going to click view image. And now these are going to be sacramental registers. So it's going to be several different people are going to be listed on these pages. So if we scroll down, we find a Rooney and McCurk. Now, it's written in Latin, but the best part about it is that even though it's in Latin, we've actually indexed it in English as well. So we actually have that translation that's already going on here. And here you see you have Michael and Maria. We have Michael O. Rooney, so that's his name, McCallum in Latin, Mary and Adelia McCurk. And that notes that they were married. And Michael was from Boston. And now we have this Latin, iadem, so that means of same. So that means that she was also of Boston. So it's kind of like a nice way to say ditto to something earlier in the record. And from here, now we can see her parents' names in case we didn't have that information. So we have noted that he's the son of a Michael and Maria. So that makes sense. Minnie is probably a nickname for Mary. And we have that she is the daughter of a Michael and Ellen. Now, what you don't get on the civil marriage record is the marriage witnesses. So in this case, we have a Francisco McGurk and an Effie Mooney. Now, he has the same surname as the bride, so he's likely a brother or a cousin, someone to look forward into. And I think I did determine that they actually were siblings. And there's also this Effie Mooney, who I also determined was a cousin later. So you want to make sure we're always looking at all the different names on the records, including the church records as well. Now, when I said something about the English translation, if you wanted to see more of a transcript of what was written, you actually can go up to the top up screen here and click transcript. You could then go down to the entry that you're interested in. So in this case, I have Michael here, and you have noted the Latin that's been translated. So this could be really helpful if when you finally see a record and you're not sure about a particular name, how it was indexed, we can tell you how we index it. We have our wonderful volunteer team that actually takes care of this. So they did a nice job with translating this record accurately. And if you're looking at the bride, you could then click the plus sign to see more of that detail. Okay. So now if we go back to our demo here, we're going to go back to, okay, talk about death records. So death records, they contain so much information because not only are you knowing where and when someone died, you're also possibly seeing the cause of death, which is happening especially in those 1900s registers, sometimes even a little earlier, where they're living, and hopefully parents' names. Sometimes we start from the record of death and we need to back up. So this can be a great way to see if we can find any parents. But we have to keep in mind who the informant is, because when you die, you're not necessarily given that information to be filled out unless you went into like a hospital, let's say, and then it's being filled out for you. So you want to know who is that informant that would have given that information. You're also learning more about what cemetery you might have been buried at, or if there was a cremation that took place, as well as if there was an undertaker or funeral home that was taking care of the arrangements at the time. So if we look at some of these death records, here's another one we have out of New York City for one of my great-grandparents, Herman Schild. So we get a lot of great detail here, including where and when he died. So he died May 31st, 1945 in Brooklyn. It noted that he was married. You have his address up here at the top. You have his wife's name, Tessie, and she actually was the informant later on. So we trusted her information a little bit more because she was the wife. And when the parents were listed, the parents actually also immigrated over as well. So that made sense that she likely knew them and even had down to his mother's maiden name. So we appreciate that, Tessie. We also have his occupation. So he was a butcher at the time. And we have noted here also what he died from. So it looks like he had postoperative pneumonia, paralytic ileus, etc., and more conditions. And it looks like he went in for an enlarged prostate. So he likely had prostate cancer, and they were doing some kind of surgery to help address it. And unfortunately, he just died from a lot of complications here. At the bottom here, we have noted the name of the cemetery. So in this case, even though he died in Brooklyn, his body was actually being brought to King Solomon Cemetery in Clifton, New Jersey. So, so a little bit of ways away, but there was some family out there, so that made sense. And then we also have the name of the funeral director. How many times do we see that there's a funeral home in these death records? And the next step should be, let's contact the funeral home to try to find out if there are any files they have on them. A lot of funeral homes will have a lot of great detail. It's a matter of just seeing what records they kept historically. So you always want to keep in mind the funeral home as well as even the cemetery. Cemeteries also have burial records often, so they might be able to tell you who else is there. I actually contacted King Solomon not too long ago because I wanted to get the plot details on exactly where Herman was buried so I could put a request on Find a Grave because I wanted to see a copy of his headstone. I also asked him to confirm if Tessie was buried with him since I hadn't found a record of death for her. They said that she wasn't buried there. So I do have at least some confirmation that at least she's not there. It rules one place to look. Now, in cases where there might be a reason of a suspicious death or an accident, suicide, criminal violence, we always want to make sure we're also looking on page 2 of these records. Sometimes these aren't always filmed by the respective archives. So you want to ask if there is a page 2 of the record here. So if there was anything that was not quite kosher about his death, so to speak, in which if he had died by any kind of accident, violence, poisoning, or suicide, they would have had a note that here because there likely would have been a coroner inquest. And sometimes those records can be included with the death records shortly after it, or they can be requested separately. You'll also have a place here where the funeral director filled out a certificate. So it notes that they are taking care of the remains, and sometimes there's additional details that's going on here. This is also great when it's really hard to read information at the bottom. Sometimes the back of the page can be a lot more clear to look at. Now, let's say there was a cause of death was really hard to read. You actually could use the number on the death record. Now, this was popularized in 1899 when the International Cause of Disease classification system started being used. So you're really finding this in more modern records, 20th century. So in this case, here's a nice big 167. So if this was completely hard to read, it might at least give you an idea of what they died from. So in this case, Asbury Riley had died from accidental burn, and he lived 2 weeks after being burned. And it looks like that he got this from an open fire that occurred. Now, if I looked up the code, I can actually find out that it did say burns. So at least that gives me an idea if I had absolutely no idea. Now, if you want to find out more about some of these deaths here for the International Classification of Diseases, the CDC has a little bit of a page that talks about some of the history, and there have been several revisions. Right now, they're in 10th revisions. They're largely revising every 10 years or so. And there actually is a really great website that you can use to look at the history here. And I'll ask my staff members if they want to copy down this URL, they can share that with you. And this lets you actually see the different revisions here, and then you could click into the list to take a look at the numbers. So in this case, if I want to look into the 1900 revision, I could pull it up this way, and it pulls up as a text file. And then all you have to do is just go down to the number that corresponds on the death record to see what it says. So it gives you kind of a good idea of what was being categorized, because the governments wanted to know and statisticians wanted to know, why were people dying? That's why this was created. So in review, before we get to some questions, we want to note that vital records are really coming in a lot of different formats based on the time period and the forms being processed. So you have to look at what particular locality was doing in handling vital records, because that will determine what you're finding and where it might be held. We want to make sure we're extracting all of the information that's crucial on the record, because you never know when that one little piece might make a big difference with making that next break in your brick wall. And then finally, sometimes we have to pursue religious records as a substitute to find out more about a life event, or as a substitute when it doesn't exist. Especially when we go back into early days of America, um, the civil records were not always kept because it was not required like it is today. So we need to keep in mind that they might have been more likely to report it to a local church or other house of worship than they were to report to the local town clerk's office. Okay, so if you have any questions, we'll take a minute. I'll get back to the screen in a moment. Okay, all right, so let me turn back to, turn off the screen share here. Okay, let me turn to some questions. Okay. Okay, so we do have some questions from, let's see, from a Leslie Poitras. She's trying to access death records from DeLand, Florida. You have a cemetery deed, you called the cemetery, found what appears to be your great-great-grandfather buried with no date, and a baby, no date. Can't find birth of the baby and can't find death of either. Is there an online source? I can only find place to send paper requests, which is difficult when I'm not sure what I'm heading for. Okay, so try and access the death records. So first it would depend on exactly what time period, because depending on the state, those records may not necessarily be online. So since it was your great-great-grandfather, I would try to say, look on Family Search to see what indexes are available. So if we go on Family Search real quick, I'll show you what I would do. Yeah, Florida can be a little bit difficult at times. So we're going to go to the search and catalog, and we're going to see what county DeLand, Florida is in. Okay, so it's in Volusia. So we're going to have Volusia, Florida here in the place. We're going to click search. And we're going to go down to the vital records section. And this can actually work for anybody else that's looking at vital records, is look in the county or the town, depending on what state you're looking at, to find more records here. So in this case, it looks like they only are capturing some of the marriage licenses. So what you probably want to do is, and depending on the date of death, if he died before 1854, you'd have to look in Orange County, Florida, to look at those records next, based on the county being created later. Another thing you also want to do is look for probate files. Probate files will often usually give you at least an approximation, if not an exact date of death. And sometimes, especially with more modern records, sometimes a death record could be included, or at least give you enough details on exactly where to find it and it's filed. Well, great question. Okay, next question is from Christine. Whoops. Okay, it's from Christine. Apologies. I have a family of 6 children born in Glastonbury, Connecticut, with only the father's name recorded in the vital records. Also, the church records don't have the mother's maiden name. Most born within 2 years apart, from 1734 to 1749. To this day, I still cannot find out the name of the mother of these children, nor have I found any marriages with the above named father. I've looked at land deeds, cannot find probate for father name. Does not help the last name is Smith. Okay, yes, Smith can be very frustrating. So given that you're not able to find out the name of the mother of the children, what I would recommend doing is pulling death records for each of the children of that family, because sometimes you might find that a child that died a little bit later, especially if they're into like the 1900s or so, or in this case, you're looking at probably, you're looking at 1800s, you may find that the child's death record could give you another clue as to the mother's name. Now, since you checked land deeds, that sometimes what you might need to do is spread out a little bit more. And I would say start looking at different families that are living in proximity, and also looking at the middle name of the children. The middle name of the children might give you a link to possibly a mother's maiden name. Great question. Smiths can be tough. Okay, question. Do you advise people to always search for the church record of the marriages even after you found the civil record from the city or town? Yes, because in the case you saw here with the marriage of Michael and Delia, I had those wedding witnesses, and that might be key to continuing to build out that family and finding additional information. So I always try to look for the religious equivalent of the record if it exists, because you never know what's going to be there. So especially when you're trying to exhaust and going back further. Okay. Next question from another question, David. Do you think Family Search will release the images of New York City deaths eventually? I hope so. It's actually in a licensing with the New York City Municipal Archives. I'm hoping over time that that will change and we'll get access to those records. I would love to have them even just at an affiliate level, but it's going to take some time. Okay, let's see. Okay. We have a question from Terry Sequel. I've been looking for birth records for John Pratt. He was born in 1668 in Massachusetts. He married Ruth Stimson. There are so many John Pratts, it's been confusing. Are there birth records that far back? Yes. So checking at the town level is key to seeing if you could find anything. So depending on what town in Massachusetts you were looking at, you could narrow it down here. So, so let's say we were looking at, we'll pick a town here. Let's pick a new town. Let's pick Newbury, Massachusetts. So in this case, I'm in Newbury, Massachusetts. If I wanted to look for any town records, you could go down and go to the vital records. You can go to the town records too, but the vital records are usually a lot more limiting, and you're getting rid of the extra stuff of all the meeting minutes and other things you don't want to look at. So depending on what you were looking at, depending on the time of incorporation, you could look. So in this case, here's a case of records of births, marriages, intentions, and deaths dating back to 1635. So yes, you can definitely go back and see if there is any. Now, if you're not sure which John Pratt it is, you may want to look and see if there's anything identifying him in records such as an occupation. Did he serve in any kind of militias later on, the military? That could be a good way to tell if you have the right person as well. So keep doing that fan club approach to also see if you can identify any siblings of him as well. Okay. Yep, and there was a question about showing a pre-1850 mass vital record. So if we go up to American Ancestors, and if we go to search, we can go into the vital records section here. That's one quick way you can do it here. So we're going to just do a search, and here I'll do Newbury again. So let me do Newbury, search. Actually, you know what? Let me see if I update my dates a little bit here. So I'm going to update my dates to see if I can get something before that. Okay, so these actually are marriages. Here, let me go into the vital record collection in one moment. So I'm going to go to browse databases A to Z. And here's another place you can get to the Massachusetts vital records is you can type in Massachusetts vital, and this will actually pull up the list here. So we have up to 1920. So when you get a little more modern records, we do split them out a little bit more. But so here's one for 1620 to 1850. And I'm just going to go and browse one of the towns here, just to show you an example of what they look like. So keep in mind, these are the published records. So these are actually typed out from the original town records. So the original town records are going to be on sites like Family Search, but these make it a little bit easier when you're just looking for the right family, if you're just when you're looking for candidates or just getting started. So in this case here, we have Anna Cragen, twin daughter of John and Judith, March 2nd, 1742-43, because there was a calendar change. You also are going to see notations at the end of some of these entries, such as CR1. These usually are going to point to like church records. If it's like PR1, they're like private records. At the beginning of each of these volumes, there is an abbreviation section, so you can actually decipher where these sources are coming from. But as you can see here, records are really before 1850. They're going to be very very short and to the point on what's being captured. So you're not getting all that great detail like you would today. Okay, we got another question here from Kristen. Oh, never mind. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, we have one more question here from Kristen Moore. My great-great-grandfather, William Gay, was born in Bridgeport, Addison, Vermont, May 22nd, 1833. I've been unable to find a birth record for him, though I found records for his relatives. Any thoughts? Also, I have a middle name for him, but only by word of mouth. He only ever uses middle initial. I'd love to know what it is. Okay. So if you haven't been able to find a birth record for him, first thing I would do is, since you know all the others relatives, possibly siblings, is you want to see if you can find some church records in the area. So I would say study the religion of the family, try to see if there is any records where the children might have been baptized at that time. You're also going to want to look for other records that will help give you any ideas of perhaps maybe, was he maybe born in a separate town and his birth was just registered later in Bridgeport? That might be partially why you're not finding it. So, and even with that middle name, it's possible he could have been registered under the middle name and maybe reversed it later in life. So something to keep in mind is that there might be other, in this case, the Gay families in the area. So you want to exhaust all of them and just see if maybe it could be recorded elsewhere in the church or a neighboring town. Okay. Oh, and we have a question from Jan Murphy. For records in Massachusetts which are amended, are they usually corrected on the original page, or should we also look for another record later on? Okay, great question. So in some cases, when a birth is recorded, sometimes other records too, there usually is an amendment done. So maybe the parents' names were captured wrong. Maybe there was a name change being done. A lot of times we'll see someone is like female and then the surname, or male and the surname, and then later on the record was updated to reflect their original name. So with those amended records, the corrections sometimes appear on the original town ledgers that you find, like on Family Search, the town clerk records. There also are deposition volumes that are kept by a lot of the town clerk's offices. So if you see a notation of a particular volume and page number on the birth record, noting that there was a change, that would be something I would pursue next, is to contact the town clerk to see if they have that volume that tells you why the change was being made. And a lot of times you're going to find those amended records in separate series. So for Massachusetts, for example, there's different collections that are at the Mass State Archives and are slowly coming onto Family Search as well, where you can start to look at those amended records. And what's great is that they usually keep the same certificate number attached to the record, and maybe there's more of like an R or something, or a C or something that corresponds with that correction. So that makes it really easy to find it. It's more a matter of locating the amended record. Oh, we got another question here for Leslie. Was it common for people to record births elsewhere? I also have a great-great-grandmother, Mary Jane Dodge, born in Newbury, Vermont. A couple different sources confirm this. However, father came from Roxbury. I can't find her in Vermont anywhere. Is there a source that explains why people move around or help decide why they move? So there's not necessarily going to be one source that's going to tell you why people move, because people move for all different kinds of reasons. Economical is probably one of your main reasons. You're trying to find a way to make a living or find land, or you're going to maybe join some family elsewhere. So, sometimes those could be some key reasons why you're moving. Especially if you're following a whole congregation, that would be popular as well too. So it can be popular to record births elsewhere, because when you first get into town, you want to make sure you're noting that all your children have been recorded by the town clerk, especially since they're going to want to push you to have that information. And it's good to have on hand when they need to make sure that you are, you're a resident of the town and that you're able to use all the different services available, and that you're not being, you don't need to be provided for by the town. So it's an accountability as well. So it can be very common that births can be recorded elsewhere when people are migrating. So when that happens, you want to use things like land deeds to really track migrations between different locations, because often when you have a land deed, you will say I so and I so and so, or in this case third person, so and so of blank, and then they usually give the town, the county, and the state. So that can be a great way to see when someone's moving around. You also can look at what we call mug books. So those are like those county and town histories. They often can give you an idea of why certain people were moving to a certain location. And sometimes they do name a lot of great names that can help you put everyone together. So using that, that fan club to help assemble different people can be really helpful to figure out why someone is moving to a certain area. Oh, we have one more that came in. We'll do one more and then we'll close out. So we have a note that his father died in New York. 1810 was a revolution. No mention of other children as war. Where else should I look? Okay. So if you have an ancestor that was in the Revolutionary War and no mention of his children in his war record, where else should you look? So what you really need to do is you need to back up this timeline. So if they were in the Revolution, one thing I would look for is there a pension file, whether Edward had filed it or his surviving widow had done. That could be a great way to back up. Next you'll want to do is look for his probate file. So even though the children aren't named in his war record, his probate would help you identify if there's other children that were being provided for and if he gave any portion of the estate. So based on where he is in New York, I would look at the county records. A lot of the county records on Family Search have been digitized, so that would be a good place to start. And I would go through the indexes and see if you could find a record for Edward. Okay, thanks for your question, Jenny. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to hope to be doing this about once a month on a different topic. So stay tuned for when we're going to be doing our next Facebook Live. If you're interested in continuing to engage with us on social media, we have a weekly Twitter chat on Tuesdays. And next week, we're going to be covering French Canadian genealogy. So join us on Twitter, #OurAncestors, and we look forward to engaging with you. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us on AmericanAncestors.org, as well as dropping comments in and after the video. The video will be published shortly, and you'll be able to rewatch it if you want to replay it for certain parts, as well as share with others. So feel free to share the link with everyone here. Thank you so much for attending. Have a great 4th of July, and have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.